Dank,
All right, we just heard Peter Panashway, who is the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. He's an Innu gentleman. Now, he spoke about a couple of things, and some of those things got a strong reaction from you, Pam. I believe it was we have to teach First Nations about the inherent value of their lands. What do you not like about that statement?
Well, there's two things around that statement. One, this is clearly them talking about their First Nation Property Ownership Act and dividing up reserves into fee simple portions of land that can be sold to non-Indians. That's coupled with his comment about the majority of resources are on or near First Nation traditional territories and reserves. We must unlock those resources for Canadians. I mean, you put those two things together, and that just kind of goes along with what the Prime Minister said today. They want what little land and resources we do have left for the non-Indigenous community, and that's just completely unacceptable. And for it to come from Minister Panashway, who fought very hard for his community to have their lands and things recognized, is just offensive to me.
Doug, I don't want to label Pam as cynical, but are you as cynical as Pam?
It's hard to outdo her, but in this case I am as cynical as her, because there's no real groundswell of public opinion out there in Indian country to put our land up in private land holdings. It's just not an issue. But suddenly this government has made it an issue, and if we get privatizing Indian land, will be a non-starter out there in prairies anyway, where we have treaties and we have a lot of land that people people own already. It's our land, and we own it. And the inherent value of Indian land includes our land as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry about that, Doug. We have National Chief Atleo just about to speak. We're going back to the feed here.
Mr. Rickford, both of you for being our Masters of Ceremonies today. Today was an important day in advancing our call to renew the relationship between First Nations and Canada. I thank the Prime Minister and all of the Cabinet for being here with us throughout the day, as well as the important regional roundtable yesterday. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you. These are absolutely critical opportunities to be heard and to begin the dialogue so very needed. This means getting back to the original relationship expressed in the gift of the wampum belt that we presented at the start of the day. A relationship based on partnership, based on sharing, and based on trust. Getting back to that relationship means getting away from the Indian Act. We have both identified the Indian Act as an obstacle. We are prepared to work with Canada on the basis of this new relationship to push beyond the Indian Act. It means we must support First Nations in creating their own laws and agreements that move them beyond and out of the Indian Act so they make the decisions that affect their own lives. This is already happening, and we need to support all First Nations in doing this. What is clear today and is evident is that First Nations, as was said, have the answers and have the solutions. We must drive the process as full partners. We will arrive at a day where the Indian Act is simply obsolete, a relic of the past, and we can do it. The proof is that some First Nations are already there. Today was a first step, absolutely, but an important step. This kind of engagement, working together to find solutions, must become a normal part of how we do business together. Specific areas of work that have been identified. The need for a renewed relationship based on the Royal Proclamation requires tangible steps, including reviewing the structure of financial arrangements to support sustainability, for First Nations. On education, so very appreciative of the chiefs from coast to coast to coast, making education one of the highest priorities. That the Government of Canada will work, as we've heard here, to implement agreed upon recommendations as quickly and as practical as possible. This our children need and deserve. On economic development, an important economic task force will be struck to make recommendations to unlock economic potential of First Nations. This must include resource revenue sharing, ensuring First Nations have a fair share of benefits from resource development on their lands. And Canada must work with First Nations to respect the spirit and intent of our treaty relationship and advance approaches to treaty implementation. Canada and First Nations agree to work to reform comprehensive claims policies to reflect recognition and affirmation of Aboriginal and treaty rights. Advancing certainty should be based on these principles, as well as expeditious resolution and self-sufficiency. Canada and First Nations agree to remove barriers to self-determination and to support First Nations governance. The Indian Act cannot be replaced overnight, but Canada commits to work jointly with First Nations on the implications of the elimination of the Indian Act. In the meantime, through the use of existing tools and development of new mechanisms, both parties can create conditions to enable sustainable and successful First Nations. And so our work does not end here. This is but the beginning. We want to see a commitment from the government to continue to work together at the highest levels in partnership. As former National Chief Kuncum said, the Crown is here. Chiefs, delegates, the Crown is here, and that is important. First Nations are here and have the solutions. First Nations demonstrated that today. We have the answers. We are the prime movers in change, and we must be full partners in this important work. We will settle for nothing less. Let go, let go. Thank you.
Another chief.
No, neither will I, but sometimes I'm a delegate.
All right, we just heard National Chief Atleo giving his speech. Now, I guess from you guys, what did you feel when you heard that speech, Doug? What was your first response?
Well, he's sticking with the fundamentals. He's sticking with the treaties and with, our place in Confederation. Although he keeps coming up with the Indian Act statements, which I don't entirely agree with. I think we should be looking to just either ignore big chunks of the Indian Act or incrementally change what we can. But, I mean, since the 1960s, people have been talking about Indian Act amendments and have gotten nowhere.
Yes.
We're just too disparate a group for something like this.
Okay. Pam, what did you feel about that speech?
Yeah, I think the Indian Act really kind of distracts from the real issues that are going on. Again, we have another political speech by National Chief Atleo with no mention of the crisis in over 100 First Nations communities in this country, especially in the northern First Nations communities. And if we don't start dealing with the crisis in housing and water and sewer and food and even things like heat, we're not going to move the agenda forward. You're not going to get any trust from the actual grassroots people, because these politicians are talking on behalf of the people. And so you're not going to get any trust from those people until you deal with their needs. We can talk about the Indian Act and all of those other things for another 20 years, but if we don't deal with the crisis, we're not going to move forward, at least in terms of our people.
Well, Doug, we were talking earlier about democracy under the Indian Act and that sort of thing. Now, having seen communities all across Canada, in some communities the chief is the chief. In some communities he's sort of the half chief, the hereditary chief. In some communities he's the overseer, an employee of INAC. Do we have a social contract with our own leaders?
That's kind of an open-ended question, but yes, I think we do. On some reserves, they've gone to what we call a band custom election. where they throw out the Indian Act regulations and they make up their own regulations. That's right there in the existing Indian Act, and you can do that. So there is that possibility. The other thing about the Indian Act is we shouldn't be looking at, that as our guideline. Indian Act is merely a piece of a legislation to administer Indians. It's for the benefit of the Department of Indian Affairs, or as I like to call them, the Colonial Office.
Well, okay, we talked about the social contract with our chiefs. Now, how or should we have a social contract with Canada?
I'm not so sure about that. I think our contract that we have now are the treaties. They kind of clearly laid out, our different spheres and who was going to do what and that kind of thing. So why do we need to keep reinventing the wheel? They want to modernize treaties. They want to renegotiate treaties. They want, instead of just going back to the original contract, those treaties, and saying, we're finally going to recognize and respect and implement those obligations which we made to share this territory. Everybody else is benefiting but us, and it's time for that to stop.
Okay. All right, we're going back to the feed. There's another person at the podium.
I was compelled to honor our national chief for the work that he did to pull this together to State Lake Co, and also to the Prime Minister for being patient and being with us today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also said that as you journey forward to your peoples, wherever you're from, that you go with a good heart, that you tell the story of today and the historic significance of today to your children, to your grandchildren. That, as was so eloquently alluded to, that as the sun sets today and the sun rises tomorrow, it's going to be a new day for all our people. And my prayer today is to thank the Creator of all good things for this day and in what it brought for many of us, even the skeptics, the people that didn't believe that something could come out of this. It was interesting that the elders, as we discussed the proceedings, we all had good feelings all day long. We were feeling very good about what was happening. In the spirit of the Creator and the ancestors, we felt that the movement was very positive, the three of us, as we sat and talked about what was happening today. I don't know how long I was supposed to be up here, but I'll get to my prayer, I promise. But it's very emotional for I'm sure for many of us, not just here but throughout the country, to witness this. I'm sure if we were to ask some of our people how they were feeling today, we would hear a lot of really good things. And that makes me feel good. That we could say that we came to a place in time that many of us dreamed of for many, many years. So thank you again, Prime Minister, and all your ministers that joined us and made us feel so welcome here. I'm going to ask you to stand as I say my prayer. Waikash tlai hawel, Waikash tlai. Tlai ko wanish chamah da sutil. Qa modit uyeluk nehel akal haki. Tlai ko wanish tlai atqinna ilhabat tsikh masabi elgankun. Tlai ko wanish lahu as Prime Minister. Yak man het mamuk. Inchad. Ya atqin tsikh تقساقن لاكشيني مو ويكلاتش الحكو قاعد متقنه تيق مطلقية كالحكي تلايكو وانا سوتي الحوال ناس يقوي ميت كنيحل ويكقن هايا بطشل قسقنه كالحكي. Thank you for this day, Creator, and let us not forget the things that were said and promised to one another today. Let go, let go.
Thank you, Elder Williams. I'm tempted to say this was fun.
Prayer.
All right, that was Elder Marty Williams. He's an AFN elder. We'll let his message stand as it is. Now, we got just a few more minutes before we wrap up here, so I want to give our pundits a chance to give some closing statements. Now, First Nations do things differently than Canadians, and that comes out in these meetings. So Doug, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we open and close our meetings with a prayer. And if you listen to these prayers, they're talking about coming together and thinking together and working together and speaking in one voice and talking about harmony and this type of thing. And then at the end of the prayer, they thank the Creator, you know, for bringing us all together and this sort of thing. And it gives you a very good meaning, if you're going to go to a band meeting, for example, or just a chief and council meeting, they'll open and close with a prayer.
Yeah.
And it's a very important part of our culture. As I remember, with the very first ministers meeting we had, Trudeau made a comment about that. He said, "You guys always pray," and then he said the Lord's Prayer after that. So it's kind of, it's our culture, and I think it's a very important thing that we do.
Okay.
Yeah, like I agree with what he's saying in terms of the importance of it, because no matter what happens, whether everything has kind of unraveled during the day, whether there's difficult relations, it's the elders who started off on a positive note and ended on a positive note, because they're sharing that wisdom and working together, despite the fact that they're all cognizant that there's going to be challenges. But it's their role to keep our spirits uplifted and to keep all of us inspired to keep moving forward, despite whether we liked or didn't like what was said here today. So for me, as the panel cynic, I very much appreciate and I'm uplifted by those comments.
Okay. Well, you know, that's an interesting thing. A lot of our politicians are sort of middle-aged people, and you know, we put great faith in our elders, and we have such high hopes for our youth. So, Doug, should elders and youth be more involved in this process? Should we be seeing them as part of these meetings? Oh,
absolutely, because those youth are going to become leaders, and the elders were leaders and still are. Yeah. And so it's very important that we all come together, because let's face it, if you bring many minds together, you're going to come up with better solutions than if you have just one or two people making all the decisions.
Yeah. Well, Pam, you know, you're a tweeter as well. You know, you're on Twitter, and you know, talking about the youth. Yes, we're having sort of the grand leaving, but we'll keep talking with Pam as we go on. So, you know, we just saw you know, the Middle East spring, so to speak. That, and lots of people said that rode on a wave of social media. Is there a possibility for us as First Nations to have our own spring that might be you know, spurred on and supported by social media?
Well, the thing I really like about social media is that it connects all of us. We have so many diverse skills and experiences and insights and opinions into all of these things, both within our communities and outside, that we can totally connect via social media and help empower one another, whether it be a series of informational protests, or whether it be helping to build the capacity in another First Nation by members of a different First Nation. That social media is such a powerful tool, and the youth have embraced it. So the AFN Youth Council was here today, and we were tweeting back and forth about what's happening in one room and what's happening in another. And so just keeping connected with the youth by all of us, even us here on the panel, that's really important. And I think they're definitely the key to moving forward.
Okay. You know, you did talk about an interesting thing, and I'll ask you, Doug, about that. You know, are First Nations now working together the best that they can, or can we do a better job?
Well, we can always do a better job, let's face it. But I think we're doing pretty good right now, working together. I think the common ground we have is the treaties, the British North America Act, and those things that bind us together. And they not only bind us together as First Nations people, but they'll bind us all together as Canadian people, because, as we said earlier, we're all treaty people. We've all benefited in one way or another from the treaty process.
Okay. All right, so we are pretty much at the end of our coverage of the Crown First Nation gathering here in Ottawa. We are going to be there's going to be scrums with a number of politicians. The Prime Minister is expected to talk at 5:30, but that's not certain. And then national news at 6 o'clock. So